Well, I hold in my hand a ghost story that comes from a publication that is not really known for its tales of the supernatural. I'm talking about the American Journal of Ophthalmology, a medical journal. This is from a 1921 edition. Just in case your subscription lapsed during World War I, I'm just going to read from one of these articles. This is a letter that a doctor sent in. It's from one of his patients, actually, this letter. She's identified as Mrs. H. And in the letter, she's describing a very strange series of events that happened to her and her family, starting when they moved into a rambling old house on November 15th, 1921. This house was out of repair, had no electricity, was lit by gas lights, a very gloomy house. Albert Dene is the person who unearthed this article, and he agreed to come into the studio and read from Mrs. H's account of what happened to them.
Mr. H. and I had not been in the house more than a couple of days when we felt very depressed. The house was overpoweringly quiet. The servants walked about on thickly carpeted floors so quietly that I could not even hear them at their work.
I love how no story of this era can be complete without servants padding about.
And they had many servants. One morning I heard footsteps in the room over my head. I hurried up the stairs. To my surprise, the room was empty. I passed into the next room, and then into all the rooms on that floor, and then to the floor above, to find that I was the only person in that part of the house. Sometimes, after I've gone to bed, the noises from the storeroom are tremendous, as if furniture was being piled against the door, as if china was being moved about, and occasionally a long and fearful sigh or wail. Sometimes as I walk along the hall, I feel as if someone was following me, going to touch me. You cannot understand it if you've not experienced it, but it's real. As I was dressing for breakfast one morning, B, who was 4 years old, came to my room and asked me why I'd called him. I told him I'd not called him, that I'd not been in his room. With big and startled eyes, he said, "Who was it then that called me? Who made that pounding noise?" I told him it was undoubtedly the wind rattling his window. "No," he said, "it was not that. It was somebody that called me. Who was it?" And so on he talked, insisting that he'd been called, and for me to explain who it had been.
It gets worse. The adults and the children are held down in their beds by unseen figures. Beds shake. Their plants die. They and their children feel weak. They have no energy. They get severe headaches.
Some nights, after I've been in bed for a while, I've felt as if the bedclothes were jerked off me, and I've also felt as if I'd been struck on the shoulder. One night I woke up and saw sitting on the foot of my bed a man and a woman. The woman was young, dark, and slight, and wore a large picture hat. I was paralyzed and could not move.
And so finally, her brother-in-law comes to them, she writes, with a thought about what might be happening.
Her husband's brother comes to them in January and says that perhaps they're being poisoned. He'd read a story about a family poisoned by gas who had similar curious delusions, and he advised them to see a professor about this at once.
A quick investigation shows that the furnace is actually sending carbon monoxide fumes into the house instead of up the chimney. They fix that, and the ghostly hauntings stop. They don't feel sick anymore either, which makes a lot of sense, says Albert Dene. When he's not poking around old medical archives, he's an environmental health engineer and a toxicologist who spends a lot of his time warning people about carbon monoxide seeping into homes. And he says fumes like this wouldn't just come from the furnace of an old house. The kind of gas that they used in gas lights in that era had as much carbon monoxide as a car's exhaust. And he says carbon monoxide gas can account for everything that this family experienced.
No question about it. Carbon monoxide poisoning can cause all manner of hallucinations. Audio, visual, feeling strange things on their skin when there was nothing there. People often report that they hear noises in their ears, bells ringing, rushing sounds.
What's amazing about this story is what a completely traditional ghost story it is. I feel like everything that happens to them, I've heard in some ghost story at some point or another. And then it turns out to be carbon monoxide poisoning.